Welcome to our webinar on Turner's 2030 Goal, Major Findings and Look Ahead. Really appreciate you joining us today. We're really excited to have you and join us as we talk about two really important topics to Turner's sustainability program. My name is Emmy LaFountain. I'm a sustainability project manager working for headquarters, but based out of the Bay Area near San Francisco and California.
My name is Brian Schmidt, General Superintendent on the Facebook data centers, PCI 1 and 2 in Iowa.
Awesome. So the first part of our webcast is going to cover the basics of our 2030 program and talk about some of the results and trends we've been observing during our pilot program for the first couple of years. Afterwards, Brian's going to talk about the reduction side of things and dive into how his team has implemented some of the more tangible strategies to reduce carbon emissions and water use on the job site. So should be a good session. If you have any questions, please type your thoughts into the chat bar and we will save some time at the end for a Q&A session. So let's go ahead and get started here. So the reason why we're here in the first place is partly because of this list. And as you know, Turner has held its spot as ENR's top green builder for 13 years in a row now. But something to keep in mind is that this ranking is made purely on a basis of green work we've received. But as our SVP Lisa Valentine in California likes to say, being a green builder isn't really about how many green buildings we build, it's more about how we can build buildings greener. So to phrase it another way, if the metrics that ENR uses were to change, what is Turner left with outside of the spec books that make us the greenest builder in the States? So we started asking ourselves this question a couple of years ago, and we came up with 3 pillars, and you've probably heard about them by now, if not. The first one is green buildings, and that's the idea that we're going to continue to learn and grow our green building knowledge and experience amongst our company. So this is the lead APs, this is how to deliver on well buildings on your job site, etc. Resiliency is the idea that we're going to promote personal health and safety during the construction process and increase technical expertise in resiliency. And the one that I'm focused on is environmental efficiency, which captures our commitment to ecological sustainability. And specifically, something that we're going to be talking about today under that pillar is this very special commitment called Turner's 2030 goal. And this goal states that we're going to commit to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and water consumption of our on-site construction operations by 50% by the year 2030. And so what does this commitment mean from a timeline perspective? Well, for the past 2 years, about 70-ish projects or so that started metering prior to December 31st of last year were participating in what we call our metering pilot program. And these projects were busy identifying job site trends and letting us know if we were reducing our job site emissions by 50%, from what baseline are we reducing from? So as these projects finish up in the next couple of years, we'll be able to definitively say that our average 2020 project used X tons of carbon or Y gallons of water per square foot. Now 2030 is only 9 years away, so now that 2021 has started, we've actually entered the reduction phase of our goal. And this is when we apply our reduction strategies, continue to create national operations standards, and do a check-in on projects that are already participating to measure our progress against that goal. And the projects that are going to help us see if we've met our 2030 goal are actually going to start roughly in the 2028 range. So it's important to see this graph because 2030 sounds like a really far ways away, but in reality, it's only 9 years away, which is roughly about, put it in another frame of perspective, 3 to 4 projects away. So let's talk scope. We've asked our baseline projects and the projects that participate during the next couple of years to measure within certain parameters. Our program covers fuel combustion, electricity usage, and water usage within the job site fence, or in other words, anything that burns, zaps, or drips within the job site fence. Since it's within the job site fence, that means that deliveries and commuter vehicles are currently excluded from our calculations. And just to stay consistent from a timeline perspective, any project that's participating is measuring from shovels in ground all the way until substantial completion. Furthermore, when we ask projects to participate, not every project is going to be a great fit. Generally, we like projects that are over $10 million in volume and have clearly defined utility boundaries. And ultimately, participation is being determined at the end by the operation manager in that region. So if you find today's content exciting and you're looking to get involved, please do reach out to your local sustainability manager, and we will make sure to get the identification process started for your project. Before we go too much farther as well, I wanted to familiarize you all with this life cycle analysis graph. We'll continue to see this graphic in future webinars, but essentially it covers all the opportunities for carbon emissions during a building's life cycle, from the moment you blast apart a mountain all the way until you take everything to the landfill. So traditionally, the green building movement has really focused on the green use stage of a building. And this is your energy efficiency, this is your LED lights, this is your high R value envelopes, the big HVAC retrofits. This is where traditionally the building industry has focused when it comes to green buildings. But we're starting to see that that scope of carbon reduction potential expands greater than that. More recently, the focus has also shifted towards the product stage, or the embodied carbon of materials that we buy, anything from material extraction until the loading dock of the factory floor. And there's going to be webinars on this blue product stage going forward, so do keep your eyes peeled if you have more interest in that. But what I wanted to focus on today were these A5 and C1 parts of the graph, which is the construction operations phase. So that covers construction and installation, and also, because this is commonly part of our scope, deconstruction and demolition. So the way that we're tracking this is through a platform called Building OS, or otherwise known as Lucid. This is a third-party software that we use to track both our manually entered tickets, like our bills and our fuel tickets, as well as our automated data. So you might be familiar with this if you've installed it for a client, maybe a university or a data center has this sitting in one of their lobbies. But we're actually the first client of Lucid to use this for the purposes of construction. And it's great because it already converts everything into carbon dioxide equivalent for us. So it'll take the carbon intensity of a gallon of diesel or a tank of acetylene and convert it into pounds of carbon per unit used. And not only that, it'll also take the zip code of where your project is located and convert the kilowatt hours into tons of carbon based on where you're located, because not all electricity grids are created equal. And so what this does is it allows us to get a region and project-specific carbon and water portfolio for each of our projects and identify live usage trends. And based on these trends, we start establishing some reduction goals and measures to address them. And you're probably familiar with some of these, like our all LED temp lighting and our no idling standards. So what I'm going to dive into now is some of those trends that we've been observing for the past couple of years. The first major finding I wanted to share with you was the idea that generators are generally pretty bad for carbon emissions. And if you're on a project and you're a project manager, generators are already kind of the enemy, because guess what? Fuel is expensive. But frankly, this isn't going to be much of a surprise to many of you. And if you've been on a job site, you'll hear these things running all the time. But now we actually have data to back it up. So here you see two projects very similar that eventually switched over to temp power. The first project on the left had a bear of a time getting on their temp electrical permit, and had to be on a huge generator for the first 9 months or so before they could switch over to temp electrical. Second graph, very similar. You can see, again, the purple is their generator use, and then the green signifies the electrical use once they switched over to temp power. They did take a break in April because of COVID. But again, similar footprint. And what you can see between both of these is a similar trend that generally generators create about 5 times the amount of carbon dioxide than that of projects that have switched on to temp power. So what are the solutions? Well, one is to get on temp power earlier. There are permit expediter services out there like Power Plus while you're working on pre-con to get your team going on temp power faster. But another is just looking at the generator and making it better. So generators typically need to stay above a certain power output percentage to avoid damaging engine buildup that lowers the overall life of the engine. So what some newer models do is they have load banks that basically just discharge energy into just to stay above that optimum operating level. So basically a lot of your generator fuel just goes into heating up a metal load bank. And so I asked this group, can you think of a better use of that energy? And if you're thinking a battery would be great, I would agree, because it's a missed opportunity otherwise. There are hybrid generators or generator battery packs out there and available. Here's an example from a company called ANA of their product called Grid to Go, which is just a battery, hooks up into the battery and into the generator, and it talks to it. But the way it works is you've got this blue battery line, and every time that battery level dips below 40% charge, it kicks on the generator. And that generator both fuels this orange trailer load, but it simultaneously recharges the battery. And once that battery gets up to 85%, it again sends a signal to the battery, to the generator, says, I'm good, you can turn off now, turns the generator off, and feeds that orange load off of the battery. And so you get this kind of up-down motion of the battery. This was put on a trailer and it resulted in about 77% fuel savings. Also money savings, if you want to think about it in that way. So we're not going to say that you got to use this, but you know, it's helpful to think about equipment that we typically have on site, and just ask a question to yourselves, to your vendors, to your United Rentals or Sunbelt or whoever you have renting you this equipment. Is there a better option out there? Here's another trend that we've started to notice. Combustion-based heating is more CO2 intensive than electrical. Here are two projects. They're both on scale of 0 to 300 tons of carbon. The second project in Sacramento is about 2 times the square footage of the first one, which is based in Chicago. In both instances, green represents where they got their temp heating from. So the first one used natural gas heating, and the second one used temp power for their heating. Now, do take this data with a grain of salt, because Chicago is known to be colder than Sacramento in the winters, but the data is interesting because you can see that the carbon footprint associated with the Chicago project is about 15% or 15 times higher than that of the electricity used for heating in Sacramento in the winter, which again is represented by this green. So we'll continue to see how these trends play out in other areas of the country as the data continues to come in, but I just wanted to bring this up as food for thought. Another major finding that we're noticing is the majority of electrical use happens once we're on permanent power and when we're doing commissioning phase activities. So we didn't actually know about this until only a few months ago, because frankly, the pilot projects hadn't started finishing yet. But now that all of our pilot projects are starting to wrap up, we are noticing that there is a definite uptick in carbon emissions at the end of the project because of all of this commissioning phase activities. And this is a bit of a challenge because commissioning does require certain systems to run constantly at high loads in order to verify functionality. But it's a challenge, it's not an impossibility. And this data helps us realize that this part of the project really does demand more attention than what we had originally thought. And so it just goes to show the value of the metering program as a whole. Another point of value for the metering of our data, we found that the majority of electrical use happens off hours when nobody's on site. So if you take the area below kind of these peaks and you look at the off hour and weekend usage of a project, that takes up about 60 to 80% of the overall electricity use. It's happening when nobody's there. And this is really important because we're not just talking about carbon at this point, we're also talking about real client dollars and how can we save our client money as well. And so it's good that we're seeing this data. Now, a good question you might be asking as a follow-up is, what is it? What is making up this huge overnight load? I'm going to say it's probably not all lighting, especially now that we have an all LED temp lighting policy. It might be part of it. But when we started our metering program, originally we just threw meters on the main distribution gear for our project. And now that we've started asking our questions about what's making up this huge load, we are realizing what we need to do is actually add multi-circuit meters after the distribution gear with CT clamps put on each of the branch circuits for different purposes. So we can say, all right, how much is the hoist using? How much is the crane using? How much of this is going to power versus lighting? And so hopefully as we get more information from the projects that are now set up to do that, we'll glean more information about what this is. But in the meantime, think about what your project looks like at night. Is it lit up like a Christmas tree? Do you have your electric temp heaters running? Asking the question and doing a visual survey at the end of the workday is really going to yield some significant savings. You know, can you turn the lights off at night? Is a really good question, right? So this is really great data to see. We'll see some more trends on this come in as the years progress with our metering program. Another trend that you might have guessed, but here's the data to back it up, is that heavy equipment, site work equipment, foundations, demolitions, all those dozers you see on site are contributing to a huge percentage of our carbon emissions on the job site. And this is partly because carbon emission regulations surrounding this type of machinery has largely been ignored in the past in favor of commuter and transportation vehicle carbon emissions. So most heavy equipment that you see on site do not have catalytic converters or anti-idling features installed to reduce carbon emissions. They might have scrubbers to reduce criteria pollutant emissions. So this criteria pollutants are the things that hurt humans. Carbon dioxide doesn't really hurt humans. It's what hurts humans is the particulate matters, the lead, the SOx, the NOx, the ozone emissions. Those are all really bad for humans to breathe, and so scrubbers help reduce that. And that's also what, if you're familiar with CARB tier equipment, CARB tier 4, CARB tier 3, that's what that covers. But sadly, carbon emission and efficiency standards are pretty far behind for heavy equipment. And so what does this mean? How can we stop having such high emissions? Well, one solution is to stop idling. An EPA study used telemetrics and found that class 7 machinery tended to idle about 40% of its operating time. So when you think about our 2030 goal, and man, 50% sounds like a pretty lofty number. Once you contextualize that number in terms of how much we're just spending it idling, that's a big reason why we implemented our no idling standard last fall. But the other solution is that we've got to electrify our equipment. And you probably saw this coming. Now, before we dismiss this, because it sounds like a really heavy lift, I want to first start off by saying that this shift is already happening. So over in Oslo, they became the first city in the world to establish an all-electric construction site mandate by the year 2030. And in order to do that, they actually already started or finished all-electric construction sites in the city. So there have been 4 to date, with more starting in. 3 other major cities, Los Angeles, Mexico City, and Budapest, have all made really similar commitments, and we do expect to see more cities sign on to this as time goes on. And similarly, Brian, right after this, is going to talk about what Turner specifically has been doing to electrify. So don't lose hope quite yet. Don't turn off your computers. We're actually already on our way towards this reality. As a quick primer, why is it important to electrify? As you know, electricity has probably, as you probably know, electricity has been trending towards renewables as its main source of power. And already many states have created renewables targets for their electricity grids. So this means that as time goes on and the closer and closer we get to having zero carbon electricity as energy source, our projects are by default, if we electrify, going to go closer and closer to being zero carbon. So you can look at this graph. It's only a couple of months old, September 2020, and see your own state and see where they stand with decarbonization goals for their electricity grid. Here's another glimmer of hope. Back in 2019, for the first time ever, the United States renewable energy sector overtook coal as its main source of electric power. And this trend is expected to continue as coal gets priced out and climate policy continues to propel the renewable sector forward. So I'll let you put the pieces together. We can electrify our fleet, and the various regions of the world are working on electrifying our grid. We are well on our way to getting zero emissions job sites. I'm just going to quick wrap it up before I hand it over to Brian to summarize. Our usage is generally starting to shape up to be kind of this M shape, where the upfront usage is really caused in part by site work and heavy equipment, while the ends tends to skew upwards because of commissioning activities. And if the project is in a colder region, you'll see bumps during the winter months in order to accommodate temporary heating needs. So these are all worthy of investigation. I'm sure we'll continue to find more data points as time goes on. But this is why we're doing this program in the first place, and it'll help us expend our energy on the biggest chunks of the pie first. So it would be great to get more folks involved with this. We could always use some more advocacy on the job sites for sustainability. Hopefully this helped inspire you to think about job site sustainability just beyond tracking down your lead submittals from your subs. There's a lot to do out there that requires this advocacy. So if we start these conversations now with our vendors and our trade partners on some of these things that we're learning, we're going to be in much better shape in 9 years and later on to tackle our commitments to fighting climate change, because it's not just going to happen on its own. So if you are interested in getting further involved, I invite you again to reach out to your local sustainability manager. But I also invite you to visit our 2030 commitment page on TKN under sustainability. There's some awesome resources there, some ideas on reduction strategies, etc. So do take a look there. But for now, what I'll do is I'll pass it off to Brian, who's going to shift the conversation from how we're measuring our data into what we're actually doing on our job sites to reduce our carbon emissions. So Brian, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Emmy. Again, Brian Schmidt, General Superintendent on a Facebook data center in Iowa, about a $600 million job, just under 1 million square foot. But my goal today is not to talk to you about large project implementation. It's more to talk to you about how we can take what Emmy just showed and find levers and buttons to pull and push to help start meeting that goal now and in the future, and ways we can change the perspective of how we're approaching our job and planning our job to start chipping away at that impact. So as Emmy stated, Turner is a market and industry leader in sustainability. We're the nation's largest green builder. And as she spoke to, we have our 2030 goal, which is really realigning us on, we know where we were and what we were doing well. What we were doing well is not going to get us to where we want to be going forward. So we really want to try to find a realignment point and reset those sights on what we need to be doing in the future to make that positive impact in the environment, make that positive change, and realign with our sustainable clients. So with that, maybe you're like me and you have looked at what we are doing on construction sites right now, and whether it be one of the lead programs or other items, there's things that happen but largely are off-site of the construction site, right? It's something that the design team is working through, and we're just documenting and reinforcing that it's being accurately implemented from their design. Turner does have impact directly over construction waste diversion on our sites through the construction phase, which we've been able to divert 3.5 million tons since 2005. So that's a huge impact. And then obviously we have a huge ability to impact our air quality monitoring during the construction phase and at the tail end of our projects. But you may be asking yourself, then what? What do we do more beyond those items during the construction phase, similar to the items that Emmy was talking to? And how do we leverage, new and cutting edge equipment or things that are currently on the market to do our work in a better manner, to be more friendly to the environment, to create a better working environment. So from that, as I stated earlier, Turner hitting that ENR top 100 list, as Emmy alluded to, is a volume-based metric. So that means that a lot of our clients are already sustainability minded, are already aligned in our vision and our purpose to move forward in this regard and make the right steps, whether not just in a cost perspective, but in our environmental impact perspective and doing the right thing. And we're leveraging that relationship in this particular instance on my project with Facebook as a partnership. Obviously, our Iowa data centers are all wind energy fed, and they help pay to have that power fed back on the grid. But that's just one example, and you can see the slide here with a lot of other clients that Turner partners with that has a similar sustainability vision. And this is just the short end of the list, right? It goes on and on of people that we can align with. So our goal and what we want to share with today is, reach out for those partnerships, find those alignment pieces, and try to make that alignment early on in the job as we plan it so that we can set the job up for success and show those clients that we're not just doing, what the design team wants us to do to meet that accreditation. We're not just doing the minimum, we're doing the most, right? We want to work with them to find the new and cutting edge opportunities to move that needle. So with that, we have a pilot project set up where we're trying to drag some of the new items in on PCI 3.4, one of our upcoming phases. And I'll talk a little bit more of the details on that later on. So you may be like me if you're field oriented, and oftentimes, every time you get something new that comes across the desk, you need to understand, what are the holdups associated, or what are the hurdles we have to jump over associated with that new target or that new pilot? What's going to keep us from doing that item? And I like to get a full understanding of what those items are and what those hurdles are before, we move to make plans for the future, because I think it helps us, remove some of the stigmas that aren't really there, and properly plan to overcome the hurdles as you're looking at the new opportunities. Some of the list associated with this 2030 goal and this implementation on the job site that I came across with my team is just straight up time, right? Time to reevaluate, time to set your new perspective, time to look into new pieces of equipment and understand how you can make the impact. Cost is oftentimes, something that we see as a deterrent as well. How much more is this going to cost the job? Do I have enough money in the budget to cover this new piece of equipment or this new technology? Is it really what's best for the job from a cost perspective? I think often the perception, and honestly, my perception probably, short of 8 months to a year ago, was that it just wasn't available on the market, and it doesn't, because it's not widespread at this time. I don't think we have a good idea, and I didn't have a good idea of what really was out there and what really was available. And Emmy alluded to some of those items that are available, and I'll touch on that in a little more detail in one of my next slides. And then, is it part of the planning process? I just think, frankly, it's just not part of the planning process in a lot of ways right now. And we're just not considering it. We're calling for a generator and we're just, waiting for whatever generator they drop off, or, it's easy to, pull the lever like we normally do rather than reevaluate and make a difference or a different avenue or a different model for how we're going to build that construction project in the future. So with those kind of hurdles that we know are in place, we want to look a little bit more to, where the rubber meets the road, and how can we get that field implementation on the job sites, overcoming those hurdles. So one of the other things that I like to look at is, we spoke to the sustainability impact and the large impact that you can have, and Emmy's slides showed data associated with that. And so it's very evident that even incremental changes can have huge impacts on those numbers, depending on which lever you're able to pull. And we would challenge you to, pull every lever you can, if it makes sense for your project, because every incremental impact helps. But there also are other benefits associated with this that make sense, from a field perspective. Every one of us is always working for a better work environment for our tradesmen and women every day. We want them to desire to come to work on Turner projects. We want to be the best in class builder, and we want them to know that when they step on our job and see that in the way that we do work. And I see that as a mirror image of this effort as well, because as you look towards some of the new equipment that's on the market that allows this more sustainable approach, it provides us a better air quality for our men and women on the job site, and helps mitigate that risk of those safety items and that working condition and working environment that they're in and day out as they're performing those tasks. There's also the factor for our working class for the noise reduction as well. And with that noisy job site, comes the safety aspect of having to wear hearing protection, or just the straight up safety impact of not being able to properly communicate or understand something properly. And that adds a heightened risk that we don't need to be encountering on our job sites if we don't need to. And a lot of this new equipment, you get away from the combustion engine, and it becomes a lot quieter, and it really can help eliminate that noisy job site and just straight up make it a more comfortable working environment for our workforce. And then the added benefit is, we're always trying to be neighborly, to the people next to our job site. We know that our projects are an attractive nuisance, and we want to be less of a nuisance, and some of this new equipment allows us to do that. I stated at the beginning that, Turner's the industry leader. I think all of us want to continue to be and maintain ourselves as that industry leader. We want to be the best. And in my opinion, stretching in this area is just part of that avenue, right? It's part of us wanting to continue to be at that leading edge. There's also the impact, with the electric equipment comes the benefit of having less moving parts in a combustion engine, which means less maintenance cycle. And in turn, what that is going to yield most likely is potentially less downtime throughout the life of that piece of equipment. And that obviously has production benefits and flow benefits on our projects, which are hard to measure, but definitely something that we pay attention to on a daily basis. The electric equipment, which I'll show a video later on, the particular piece, has more power on demand for an electric engine versus a typical clutch driven diesel or gasoline powered motor. And then the customer vision piece is really the last thing, right? We want to continue to align with our clients, and we already have a large portfolio of sustainable clients, and we want to align with that vision and push towards the future. So the first message I want to share as we kind of look to how to do that implementation is it's not as hard as you think. And I say that because we've evaluated what's in the market right now, and there are options that are already readily available, for all Turner size projects to be able to look into and implement as it makes sense for their specific project. So off the top, one thing that you can do, it's not straight up a carbon emissions reduction, but just an environmental reduction, is evaluate the ability to use an on-site water source in lieu of a city or municipality water source for your on-site dust control. And if you're able to do that, several Turner projects across the nation have already done so. If you're able to do that, you're limiting that utility resource and you're saving that utility usage, and that's a huge benefit. The idle reduction policy that the sustainability group has already pushed out is something that we just need to keep on the forefront and be part of our daily dialogue. It's an easy win as well that we can work towards and just help change the industry through coaching and helping people understand, like Emmy alluded to, the new equipment and how it's no longer required, and remove that stigma. Lighting, LED lighting is already and has been a construction policy with Turner for a long time, but you saw on the charts, it makes it pretty easy to see that by switching to that LED lighting, it really lowers that usage and makes it so low that you almost can't even see it on the life cycle of the energy usage across the project, and that's a huge win. So I would just challenge this group to use that LED lighting for not only your construction lighting that's on temporary power, but also in your temporary lighting platforms if they are generator fed on those light plants. See if you can find an LED option. Other available equipment that's on the market that we've either seen across the Turner fleet and that we've been able to leverage here at the data center that I'm working on is hybrid light plants. There's hybrid and fully solar options. They're LED lighted, and it allows you to run that generator on a much less frequent basis, which reduces all the things that I spoke to earlier, the emissions and the noise. And it really is a nice piece of equipment, and we've seen a lot of benefits there. Less fueling from our labor team as well, which is a huge win. Less cost from a diesel fuel standpoint as well. Solar cameras, for as we continue to stretch into security options, that's a nice win and an easy lever to pull because you don't have to do electrical infrastructure or partner it up with a generator to have that security. And it's really a set it and forget it, and it's extremely simple. So definitely look into that. Boom lifts is something that I think is on the market, but I think largely people don't even know that it's out there. In fact, we had a hybrid boom lift on our job site for months, and the subcontractors, trade partners didn't even know that it was a hybrid unit, and they were using it, and it performed the same as the other piece of equipment that they had. So there are hybrid and all electric boom lift options from 60 and 80 foot reach scenarios, and they're prevalent enough that we're looking to go towards a full implementation scale on our next phase of construction here in Iowa. So I would just challenge you to look into that as you pursue your next project. Electric forklifts is an easy win. Obviously with warehousing, these have already been on the market for a long time. It's an example of something we just don't pay attention to when it shows up on our job site. They order a forklift. One that shows up is typically combustion engine ran, but it doesn't need to be that way. So I would just challenge that rather than ordering the typical forklift, order an electric model from a rental basis, or challenge your trade partner to bring out an electric model. Air compressors is another perfect example of this. We use these across the project for many different things. Electricians use them a lot to prove out conduits, and it just creates, obviously a fuel burn, but also a noisy job site as you're running those across the project. And it's really an easy win, again, like I said, to have that environmental impact, but create a better working environment holistically. Rebar shear is another one that's on the market that you can see one of our safety managers modeling it Vanna White style there, but that is a awesome win for our project. And I would challenge, if you haven't seen them, to use them on every project. The cutoff wheels, and those actual fuel burning cutoff wheels that we use, typically a quickie saw type application for rebar cutting. Yeah, you still need to use that a little bit. The rebar shear doesn't work for all of it, but for 95% of it, it does. And it creates a better working environment. You don't have near as many air quality issues that you have as you go to install those interior slab on grades, and they're highly effective. Mass transit is another one that only really applies to larger projects, but definitely consider as you're planning your job, does it make sense to let people just operate on a utility vehicle and foreman vehicle and truck operation, and have a lot more pieces of equipment on site, or does it make sense to mass transport and just reduce the number of engines running? That's something that you can evaluate as you plan the job. A clean burn generator is another easy win, and this is an incremental adjustment. You can see in the forefront a power bank that's actually a battery pack that I'll talk to you a little bit more in the next slide, but behind that is a newer model generator, and you can get, if you ask or pay attention to what you're getting on your site, the newer generators have a much reduced emission than our typical generator, and some of them even already have scrubbers and diesel exhaust fluid that goes into those generators. And I would just challenge us to make sure we know what's showing up on our job site and make the decision to ask for the right thing. And then electric temporary heat. You saw the model that Emmy put up regarding what that usage was, and depending on the volume of your project and region, your temporary heat is a huge load and a lot of carbon emission. So I would just ask, if your infrastructure supports it, to look into this as well. And if you're able to support an electric infrastructure-based temporary heat plan, or as much as you can, support that load from an electric standpoint. We've found that oftentimes, it's a cleaner burn, it's a safer application, so there's a lot of wins there. Beyond the easy wins that we wanted to share, there's a lot of stretch opportunities that we're searching for as well. And Emmy spoke to how the heavy equipment that's usually prevalent on our jobs at the upfront as we do the earthwork and footings and foundations, have a huge impact. So we don't want to overlook those opportunities as well. In one example, we've been able to procure 2 Caterpillar D6 XE dozers out here for our construction site. And we have actually a little video here that we'll show you that kind of paints the picture of, from 3 years ago when our trade partner trialed this piece of equipment and found that it didn't really meet their needs, to now we're going to show a video of the operator actually giving you feedback on how it's operating and whether it's up to par with the typical piece of equipment they were using. So take a look.
Machine's only got 68 hours on it, brand new. Everything about it's pretty nice. I love the fact that it's eco-friendly. It takes roughly 25% less than a normal dozer. Holds a really tight grade. It's within 5/1000ths, so that's pretty sweet. It's got really great power. It's equal to a T in my eyes. It's snappy. It almost turns like a skid loader. Built really heavy. There is no weight for the turbo to spool up. Just all the power is right now. There's no weight for the power. Makes my life a lot easier. Home away from home.
So as you can see, that individual, is a true representation of how that piece of equipment is operating, and they actually think it's exceeded what their previous piece of equipment was, and so That's just a proof that the market has grown in the recent past, and in the stuff that's now rolling out on the market in 19 and 20 and 21 is up to standard in a lot of ways, and in some cases is exceeding what was there previously. Excavators is another perfect example. This is, so we've found 2 large excavators to date and several mini X's that are all electric and hybrid that we'll be utilizing here and kind of test running. But those are out in the market. They're not necessarily readily available, but if you search them out, you can find them, especially on the larger piece. The mini X's are a little more prevalent and obviously have that environmental impact that comes along with it. And then lastly, as we kind of look past the large equipment, scissor lifts is one of the most used pieces of equipment on our construction projects across the nation. JLG has a new Da Vinci model that's an all electric. It eliminates the hydraulic component piece of a typical scissor lift, which obviously eliminates a lot of quality risk associated with hydraulic spills and the maintenance that comes along with those and the downtime associated with that. But it has the added benefit of requiring a lot less energy to charge as well. So there's a great energy reduction as we see those new pieces of equipment. We've been able to trial 15 of those out here at the Facebook Data Center to date, and definitely see those showing up in a big way in the market in the near future. Beyond that, we have some additional new to market items. The ones I just went over there are ones that we've already seen out there, but there's also items that are just coming off the factory floor now or in the next few months. Liebherr is offering a 250-ton crawler crane that's all electric, and that's going to be a huge change to the market and the first one of its kind. There also are payloaders on the market, a John Deere wheel loader, a Volvo option that are out there as a hybrid component similar to that Caterpillar D6. Case is making a backhoe that's an all-electric motor, all-electric component that is on the market in 2020, 2021 as well. We should see skid steers rolling out on the market here at the beginning of Q2, and we should get a couple of those to trial at the PCI project. And we'll obviously update this group with feedback as we do that, but you'll see those emerging on the market as well. Concrete trucks is one that's a little bit more out there. They're showing up now in Europe and haven't quite made their way to the US, but we know that they will in the coming years. Hybrid generators, obviously Emmy talked to it on the stat that we shared. We've got 3 power banks out on our PCI site right now that we're trialing. That's a perfect example. Sunbelt, our partner for equipment rental here on our site, own 3, and we have the first 3 here. They've placed an order for 250 of them, right? So that's something that's going to become very prevalent in the marketplace and is going to become a much more available option, but it's just now starting to get saturated. Telehandlers is another example. It's been in Europe, and we're just now seeing it emerge in the US, and we hope to trial one of those in 2021. And more along the 5,000 pound capacity size. UTVs have been available in a traditional old school battery model, similar to the golf cart batteries. And we expect and have had forecasts from our manufacturer partners that we'll see a lithium ion component battery come out in the next 2 years. So we're excited to see that as well. Trucks you've seen in the news, so we're looking forward to not only the hybrid trucks that are rolling out, but the all-electric versions. And then lastly, buses obviously are used for mass transit. There are electric and hybrid options, and we hope to be able to leverage those on Turner projects as well. So those are just a few of the ideas and the opportunities that you can look into as you plan your project. Facebook, for example, is already a big proponent of metering and understanding their usage, and so it was a nice partnership, and we were able to get in and plan for the building OS system on our future job. And like Emily alluded to, if you're interested and able, definitely reach out, and we look forward to not only understanding our usage, but impacting and reducing our usage in the future. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Emmy, and we'll open it up for questions.
Great. So that kind of concludes the content of our presentation. It looks like we have a few people still on. So if you do have some questions about any of what we've covered, you are absolutely welcome to send us an email, reach out to us directly. Otherwise, you can drop your questions in the chat or take yourself off of mute and ask your questions directly.